Okay, I am back with another Heroscape video. And this time I'm going to share an army build that I used at a local monthly meetup. And this event took place a little over a week ago, so along with my thought process in putting together the army, I can share my results as well. The format for this November meetup was called Dungeon Defender, which meant each player would have a destructible crystal in their start zone with 6 life and a defense value of 4. And this was given a boost of +2 when attacked from range of 4 or more. The crystal also caused any adjacent figures to have -1 defense. So a pretty cool addition to the regular format. The army build was 400 points using Delta. So the army I came up with was centered around the common squad Granite Guardians. I just recently acquired 4 squads of the Granites and wanted to try them out. Their standard cost is 100 points, but Delta knocks them all the way down to 75, which meant I could run all 4 squads and still have 100 points left. And with those remaining points, I went with Warden 816. Now, he has a direct synergy with all guards that gives them +1 move, which is great because that's the Granite's biggest weakness. Their main move value is 3, which is amazingly slow. So that left me with 25 points, and I went with the relatively new figure Deflectatron, who I hadn't used before. And Deflectatron has been getting a little bit of shade online for being both confusing and just pretty weak. But I actually think he's pretty cool, and I'll share why I think that in just a minute. But first, back to the Granites. Now, obviously they're pretty slow, but they actually do a couple of cool things to help mitigate that. First, they have their rock throw ability, which means if they're at height advantage, then you can add 2 to their range, which makes them kind of a cool mid-range figure. And because you're at height, it takes their attack value from 3 to 4, which is pretty good. And then they've got landslide, which means if they are at height and adjacent, then they roll an additional attack die, which means they go from a 3 attack value up to 5, which is pretty good. And then they also have this ability called Gain the High Ground. And so what that means is after you take a turn with the Granites, then you can move each Granite you control 1 space, and the space can be up to 4 levels higher, so they can jump up on height. And you get to do this with every Granite in your army. So it helps them all move forward and advance on the map. So I figured that that would be a good way to mitigate how slow they are and hopefully march them across the battlefield and get to my opponent's crystal. The Granites are also pretty sturdy with their 5 defense, and hopefully they're going to be hanging out up at height most of the time, and so that gives them a defense of 6. So that's pretty good. Next we've got Warden 816, and he's really just there to help the Granites move a little bit faster. But he's also pretty useful in his own right, and my plan for him is just to keep him in the back, close to the crystal, and have him pick off anybody who tries to get close with his 7 range. And he also has the Eviscerax special attack, which means if somebody gets close, he's got an attack of 5. But it can't be used on small figures. But either way, he's pretty good to just hang out, give his movement synergy, and be another layer of defense for my crystal. And then lastly, we have the Deflectatron. And I think he's a pretty interesting figure. He's definitely a filler, to be sure, but he's got some unique abilities. He's got orbital deployment, which means he doesn't start the game on the battlefield. And at the start of a round, before you place order markers, you can put a Deflectatron that hasn't entered the battlefield on an empty space within 3 clear sight spaces of a friendly figure. And that's pretty cool, especially for this format where we've got a crystal on the other side of the board that we're trying to destroy. So if I can march some Granites down to the other side, then I can drop the Deflectatron in, and he can be pretty close. He is a little bit weak because of this passive ability, which means he never makes leaving engagement attacks, which isn't great. But he can get in the way. And he also has this magnetic deflector shield, which means that anybody that's adjacent to him cannot determine clear sight on any figures. And when you're adjacent, you can also change the die result if you're defending to a shield, if it's possible. So a couple of good uses for that. Let's say that your opponent has Raylan and she's giving her defensive aura. Well, you can annoyingly drop the Deflectatron right next to her and she no longer has clear sight and no longer gives that defensive bonus. He's also not terrible in terms of his stats for just 25 points. He does have an attack of 3 and a defense of 4, which made me think, well, if I get lucky and just drop him right next to the crystal, he might actually be able to take a couple of good whacks at it. So anyway, I think he's got some uses, and he's also a guard, which means he gets the Warden's +1 movement bonus. So anyway, that's my army, and here's how I did. So in my first match, I went up against an Einar Imperium build, which I actually fared pretty well against. They were able to get out quick and take some hided spots on the map, but I was able to march up to them and knock them off of those spots and then start smashing them with rocks until they were all dead. Well, all but one. And then, unfortunately, time got called on our match, and my opponent had 1 wound on my crystal, and I didn't have any on his, so he got the W. In my second match, I went up against a Sentinels of Jandar build that also included a Frost Giant and a squad of Samurais. And I got pretty lucky, and I was able to kill the Frost Giant really early, and he whiffed on his dying swipe, and then I was able to take out pretty much all the Sentinels and then my opponent's crystal. So 1 for 1 at this point. In my third match, I got annihilated fast by Queen Maladrix, and she was able to march across the battlefield and actually take a hided spot on my crystal and then killed it in 1 turn with her double attack. And I made some pretty critical errors with movement and allowing my opponent to get into some really strategic spots, and I shouldn't have done that, but oh well. And in the last match of the evening, I went up against an Arrowglut build that included Krug, an Ice Troll Berserker, and a couple of Swag Riders. And the Ice Troll Berserker started off by going berserk, and he frenzied all the way across the map and took a couple of big whacks at my crystal before I could take him out. And then I went up against Krug and just made him mad, and then he did his Krug things and just demolished my granites. So I got wiped out in that one. So I ended up going 1-3 for the night and had a ton of fun. And I think what I'll do is I'll continue to share these army builds for the monthly meetups that I do. So I'll do another one in December, and please let me know what you think. If you've got any ideas, if you've got any thoughts or feedback for me, I appreciate it all. So until the next one, peace.